In the 24th week of her pregnancy, Sarah's military husband brought a woman home. Clara's husband tragically sacrificed his life to save mine, he had told her. I have a responsibility and an obligation to take care of her and her unborn child. I plan to give our house and your job to Clara to give them some security. Sarah looked down at her own bulging belly and suddenly found it amusing. You're repaying your debt of gratitude using my house and my job, she thought. She didn't say much. She simply turned around, went straight to the hospital to abort the baby, and completely disappeared from his world. Sarah, did you hear what I said? James stood in the middle of the living room, his military uniform crisp and immaculate. The insignia on his shoulders gleamed with a cold white light under the fluorescent lamp. Seeing that she remained silent, his brows furrowed tightly. Sarah, as a military spouse, you need to have a higher level of understanding. No matter what happens, you still have me. I would never let you and our child go hungry. But Clara is different. She lost her husband. She needs a job to rely on and a roof over her head to shelter her from the wind and rain. Sarah stared blankly at the tall man lecturing her, struck by a sudden, dazed sense of unreality. It wasn't until she touched her own heavily pregnant belly that she finally confirmed she had been reborn. She had been reborn back to the 24th week of her pregnancy, exact day James returned from his deployment. Hey everyone! What happens when a husband demands his pregnant wife give up her home and job to another woman? Let's dive into this incredible story of betrayal and walking away with your head held high. James had received his orders right after she first found out she was pregnant. He was gone for 6 long months. During those 6 months, from the morning sickness to the muscle cramps, from the backaches to the swollen feet, she had dealt with it all entirely alone. She had finally waited for James to return, yet his first words upon walking through the door weren't to ask about her well-being, but to demand that she give her house and her job to another woman. In her previous life, Sarah had felt deeply grateful that Clara's husband had saved James. Taking pity on the widowed mother and her fatherless child, who had no one else to rely on, she had agreed to give up both her home and her job without a second thought. Once the house was handed over, James moved back into the military barracks, while Sarah, following his advice, moved back to his hometown. Sarah, you're in the late stages of pregnancy now, he had told her then. I can't take care of you with my daily training schedule. Since you gave your job to Clara, you don't have anything to do here anyway. It's better if you go back to my hometown and let my mom take care of you. I'll only have peace of mind knowing she's looking after you. Swayed by James's sweet words, Sarah had returned to his hometown. But shortly after she gave birth, both of James's parents fell ill, one after the other. Left with no choice, Sarah stayed behind to care for them. That caregiving lasted for 10 grueling years. By the time she finally returned to the military base, everything had changed. James had been promoted, and Clara had become a management supervisor. When the two walked side by side, they were the golden couple that everyone envied. Meanwhile, Sarah's 10 years of exhausting labor were carved deeply into her face. Most of her hair had turned gray, her posture was slightly hunched, and the joints in her fingers were permanently deformed from years of washing clothes and cooking. When James looked at her, there was no affection or heartache in his eyes, only disgust. How did you get so old? He had scoffed. Clara had smiled and played the peacemaker, saying, You've worked so hard, Sarah, but then promptly turned around and arranged for Sarah to live in the storage room. Even the son Sarah had loved and raised since birth learned to look at her with the same disdainful eyes as his father. Mom, don't come looking for me at school anymore, he had told her. My classmates all think you're my grandma. I already told them that Aunt Clara is my real mother. Crushed beneath these repeated, devastating blows, Sarah quickly fell ill, bedridden and unable to even sit up. From beginning to end, not a single person came to check on her. Finally, on her deathbed, Clara appeared. She was dressed in an elegant cashmere coat, her makeup utterly flawless. Sarah, Clara began, her tone just as gentle as it had always been. I came to let you know that James's promotion just got approved. We're moving to the state capital. Sarah lay on the bed, lacking even the strength to lift her eyelids. Clara paused. Then, Clara suddenly let out a soft laugh. Actually, there's something I never told you. My husband didn't save James at all. He was just an ordinary soldier who died on a mission. James was afraid I would be treated unfairly in the future, so he made up that lie. Speaking of which, I really must thank you, Sarah. Thank you for giving me your house, your job, and a comfortable life for the rest of my days. After saying that, Clara walked away in her high heels. Lying on that bed, Sarah couldn't catch her last breath and died consumed by bitter resentment. Perhaps even God couldn't stand the injustice and had given her another chance to start over. This time, she was absolutely determined to make this despicable couple pay their blood debt. Sarah! Seeing that she remained unresponsive for so long, James's tone took on a heavy note of displeasure. Sarah raised her head and looked at the woman standing behind him. Clara was wearing a plain white cotton dress, her hair pinned up loosely at the back of her head. A draft blew through the hall, causing the few loose strands of hair framing her face to tremble slightly, giving her an unprovoked air of delicate vulnerability that would make anyone feel tender toward her. The moment Clara saw Sarah looking at her, her eyes immediately turned red. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't have come, but I really have nowhere else to go. James was kind enough to take me in. I don't want to cause trouble for anyone." As she spoke, her tears began to fall, dropping one by one onto the hem of her skirt and blooming into dark little spots. Seeing this, James immediately walked over and supported her by the arm. His movements were so quick and natural, it was as if he had done it 1,000 times. "Clara, don't cry. It's not good for the baby." His voice was incredibly soft, filled with a gentleness Sarah had never once heard from him. "I told you I'd take care of you, and I won't let you suffer." With that, he looked back at Sarah, his tone returning to its usual cold indifference. "Don't blame Clara." "This is my decision." Sarah simply nodded. "Oh, since it's your decision, then just do it. You don't need to run it by me." James froze, clearly not expecting her to react this way. Even Clara's tears hung suspended on her eyelashes, forgetting to fall. Supporting her heavy lower back, Sarah slowly stood up, walked right between the two of them, and went into the bedroom. The moment the door closed, she heard Clara's weak, delicate voice speak up. "James, Sarah seems angry. Maybe I should just leave." James's tender, reassuring voice immediately followed. "Where can you go all alone with a child?" "Don't worry, I make the decisions in this house." The rest of their words were muffled, but the patience and gentleness in his tone were things Sarah had never received in all 6 years of their marriage. She let out a mocking smile and rummaged through her nightstand, pulling out a piece of paper, an induced abortion consent form. When she was 4 months pregnant, she had been diagnosed with preeclampsia. Her blood pressure had remained stubbornly high, her hands and feet were so swollen she couldn't fit into her shoes, and her urine protein test showed 3 pluses. The doctor had held her lab results with a grave expression. "Your condition is very dangerous. Continuing this pregnancy could lead to seizures, coma, or even threaten your life. I highly suggest you consider this carefully. It's best to terminate the pregnancy." At the time, Sarah had cried and called James, but he was away on his mission. She dialed repeatedly, but none of the calls went through. She originally planned to tell him as soon as he got back, but now there was absolutely no need. The next day, Sarah woke up before the sky was even fully light. Since getting pregnant, her sleep had always been poor. Coupled with the heavy thoughts weighing on her mind, she had barely closed her eyes the entire night. She propped herself up, but the moment her feet touched the floor, a piercing, swollen pain shot through them. Looking down, she saw that her feet had swollen to the point where standard shoes were out of the question. Finding the largest pair of slippers she owned, she barely managed to squeeze her feet inside. Sarah simply washed up, changed into her work uniform, and headed out. The living room was completely quiet, and the door to the other bedroom was closed. James was sleeping on the sofa in the living room, positioned as if he were standing guard over it. Sarah didn't look twice. She just grabbed her bag and left the house. She worked at the military base's logistics service center. 3 years ago, the base's warehouse had accidentally caught fire. Sarah was the first to discover it and rushed inside to pull the alarm, even helping to move over a dozen barrels of fuel. After the fire was put out, her arms were severely burned, and she ended up lying in a hospital bed for 2 months. The military leaders praised her as a hero. Not only did they hold an award ceremony for her, but they also arranged a position for her at the service center and allocated her a house in the family housing area. In her previous life, Sarah had been deceived by James's lies and gave away both her house and her job without a second thought. Clara had used that job to establish a firm foothold and, with the military's care, climbed higher and higher. Meanwhile, Sarah had returned to his hometown and lost everything. In this life, she wasn't going to be so foolish again. The service center was right next to the military family housing area. Her main duty was registering the daily receipt and distribution of supplies. The work wasn't heavy, but it was tedious. When Sarah arrived, Nancy, an older coworker, was wiping down the desks. Seeing her, Nancy's face filled with concern. "Sarah, I heard you're giving this position to someone else?" Sarah paused, stunned. "Who said that?" Nancy set down her rag and lowered her voice. "You're James. Yesterday, he was chatting with someone at the entrance of the service center. He said that because of your pregnancy, it's inconvenient for you to work, so he found a relative to take over your shift. He even said you already agreed to it, so we should prepare in advance. We all thought you weren't coming in today." Sarah stood frozen in place, her fingers slowly tightening around her bag strap. James had only mentioned it to her last night, and she hadn't agreed at all. Yet he had the nerve to turn around and spread the news at her workplace, trying to force it into a done deal. Seeing Sarah's expression change, Nancy quickly grabbed her arm. "Sarah, don't be stupid. You traded your life for this job. That fire back then was so dangerous. The scars on your arms are still there. You can't just give it away because you have a soft heart. Let me tell you, a woman can give up anything, but she can never give up her livelihood. If you lose this job, you won't even have the confidence to speak up in your in-laws' house." Sarah smiled at her. "Nancy, I never said I was giving it up. He's just talking nonsense out there." Nancy slapped her thigh. "I knew it. You can't be foolish. If you have any difficulties, tell me, and I'll help you figure something out." Sarah nodded. Just as she was about to speak, Nancy motioned with her chin toward the space behind her. "Sarah, your James is here." Sarah turned around. James was striding in, his military uniform perfectly crisp and his expression cold and stern. Behind him was another person. A few co-workers in the service center stopped what they were doing, their eyes darting back and forth between the three of them. James walked right up to Sarah, glanced at the receipts in her hand, then looked at her belly. His brows furrowed. "Why are you here?" Sarah almost laughed out of sheer anger. "This is my job. Why shouldn't I be here?" James didn't miss a beat. "It's good that you're here. Clara is here too. Let her shadow you for a bit to get familiar with the work. Once the handover is done in a few days, you can just go back and focus on resting for the baby." He said it as a matter of course, as if he were arranging the most natural thing in the world. Clara stepped out from behind him and gave Sarah a timid smile. "Sarah, I'm sorry to trouble you. I've done similar work back in my hometown, so it shouldn't be too hard for me to pick up. James said to let me shadow you for a bit first. I promise I won't cause you any trouble," Clara added. Nancy couldn't stand watching this from the side anymore and interjected, "James, Sarah hasn't even agreed to this yet. How could you just bring someone here first?" James glanced at Nancy, his tone completely flat. "This is our family's business. There is no need for you to worry about it." That single sentence choked Nancy up so much that her face flushed red. Sarah took a deep breath, placed the receipts in her hand on the desk, and turned around to face him. "James, if you want to repay a debt of gratitude, I won't stop you. But this job is mine. I traded my life for it. No one has the right to make decisions for me." James's face darkened. "Sarah, what kind of attitude is this? Clara's husband sacrificed himself to save me. His child is the orphan of a martyr. The organization explicitly stated that we need to take good care of the families of martyrs. As a military spouse, how can you hold me back like this?" He spoke louder and louder, causing several co-workers in the service center to secretly sneak glances in their direction. Clara, standing right beside him, had her eyes turn red again. Even her voice began to tremble. "James, please don't argue with Sarah. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have come." As she spoke, her tears began to fall, and her body swayed slightly as if she couldn't stand steady. James quickly supported her, the heartache in his eyes impossible to hide. Sarah let out a cold sneer. "You're right. You shouldn't have come." Clara froze, the tears still clinging to her eyelashes, but her expression stiffened for a fraction of a second. Sarah looked at her, articulating every single word with sharp clarity. "Your husband sacrificed himself. The organization gave you a pension, and they also provided you with a job placement as the family of a martyr, didn't they?" Clara's expression shifted slightly, but she remained silent. Sarah continued, "But you didn't want it. You followed James all the way here from far away. You know exactly what you are really after in your heart." Clara's face instantly went deathly pale. The surrounding co-workers had completely stopped their work, their eyes uniformly shooting over, mixed with a few whispered murmurs. "Exactly. Aren't there clear regulations for the placement of martyrs' families? I rigged doing it placed 2 just last year. One went to the military supply depot, and the other went to the medical team." "Right. She refuses to go where the organization assigned her, insisting on following someone else's husband back here to steal his wife's job. Tisk, tisk. Who knows what she's really after? What do you think she's after?" the last person remarked, winking and making faces in James's direction. James's face instantly turned livid. "Are all of you so idle that you have nothing better to do?" Nancy wasn't intimidated by him at all. She stiffened her neck and retorted, "James, don't use your official rank to throw your weight around. No one here scares that easily. How did Sarah get this position? Who in the entire military base doesn't know? Yet you come back and immediately want to give what she traded her life for to someone else. Doesn't your conscience hurt as her husband?" James's face grew even darker, the veins on his forehead bulging. "Nancy, this is our family's private matter." "Private matter?" Nancy interrupted him. You came to the service center to arrange for someone to take over her shift. That makes it no longer a private matter. This is a work matter, and we all have a right to speak up. Sarah stood to the side, watching James being rendered completely speechless by everyone's rapid-fire remarks. She felt no sense of satisfaction in her heart, only an indescribable exhaustion. Clara finally couldn't take it anymore. She abruptly let go of James's sleeve, covered her face, and ran outside. Clara! James shouted, stepping forward to chase after her. James! Sarah called out to stop him. If you really think she's so pitiful, you can figure out a way to help her yourself. But don't forget, I am also a pregnant woman. James stood frozen in place, clenching his fists, his chest heaving violently. After a long while, he let out a cold sneer. Sarah, you've changed. You never used to be like this. Sarah looked down at her badly swollen feet and said softly, Yes, I was too stupid before. He stared at her for a long while before finally throwing down a parting threat. Ha! Don't you regret this? When Sarah returned home that evening, she realized what James meant by, don't you regret this? Looking around, every single thing in the house that belonged to James was gone. Half of the closet was empty. His toothbrush was gone from the bathroom counter, and even his most frequently worn combat boots at the entryway had completely vanished. Pressed under a glass on the dining table was a sheet of paper, a handwritten divorce petition. The handwriting was scribbled hastily, pressing hard through the paper, and his signature at the bottom bore a tone of spiteful anger. Sarah stood before the table, picked up the paper, and read it from beginning to end. In the column for the reason, he had written just 4 words: lacks marital understanding. She couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. She had been worrying about how to bring up a divorce, and he had gone ahead and paved the way for her. Sarah folded the divorce petition carefully, put it into her bag, and then opened the closet to start packing her own things. Halfway through packing, her phone rang. It was Nancy. Sarah, have you really thought this through? Do you actually want to transfer the house and the job to me? I've thought it through. All right then. Tomorrow, I'll have my daughter-in-law go handle the paperwork. Don't argue with me about the money. We'll pay whatever the full amount is. How can a woman survive without some money in her pocket? Sarah agreed softly. Okay. Hanging up the phone, she continued clearing out the drawers. At the very bottom, she dug out an old photo of her wedding picture with James. In the photo, Sarah was wearing a traditional red dress, her eyes crinkling with a smile, her heart and mind filled with bright hopes for the future. James stood beside her, his military uniform crisp, his expression distant, betraying no real emotion. Sarah looked at it for a couple of seconds, tore the photo in half, tossed his half into the trash, and put her own half into her bag. While she was busy, Mrs. Miller from next door walked in holding a bowl of sunflower seeds. Sarah, earlier this afternoon, I saw your James come back furious, bringing along a woman. I don't know what they were up to in the house, but he stormed out again shortly after. As she spoke, her eyes darted inquisitively into the room. Mrs. Miller, James and I are getting a divorce. Whatever he does from now on has nothing to do with me. Mrs. Miller's mouth dropped wide open. A divorce? But you're still pregnant. How? Her face was a picture of utter astonishment. My dear girl, why on earth would he want a divorce from you, Mrs. Miller was the biggest gossip on the base. Once she knew something, you could bet the entire housing quarter would know about it by nightfall. Sarah smiled faintly. I guess our time together just ran out. Hearing this, Mrs. Miller cursed a few times on Sarah's behalf, though her words carried a hint of schadenfreude. People were always like, the spectators were always clearer-headed than those in the play, yet while cursing on your behalf, they secretly hoped you would fall even harder to give their mundane lives some juicy drama. Once everything was packed up, Sarah lay on the bed and slept soundly until morning. The next day, she took her abortion consent form and went to the hospital. The obstetrics and gynecology department was busier than she had imagined. She got a queue number and sat on a bench in the hallway waiting for her number to be called. Most of the people passing by were husbands, accompanying their wives for prenatal checkups. The pairs of shadows flickering past her made her look remarkably conspicuous, sitting there alone. Just as she was lost in thought, the loudspeaker suddenly announced, Number 32, Clara, please proceed to consultation room 3. Sarah looked up toward the voice and happened to see James supporting Clara as they walked toward her from the other end of the hallway, Clara resting one hand on her waist. Clara had her other hand resting on James's forearm, her entire body practically leaning against him. Seeing Sarah, James subconsciously dropped Clara's arm and hurried forward. Sarah, why are you here? Are you feeling unwell? After speaking, he looked at her belly, a hint of worry in his eyes. Sarah took the divorce petition out of her bag and waved it in front of him. James, we are already divorced. It's best if we keep our distance from now on. Looking at the divorce petition in her hand, James's face turned pale. Sarah, you know perfectly well I never wanted to divorce you. I was just angry that you couldn't understand my arrangements. If you really don't want to give it up, then forget it. He gritted his teeth. I'll spend money to buy a position from someone else. Money? Where are you getting the money? James's salary wasn't considered low, but every month after getting paid, he had to send half of it back to his hometown. The remaining half went toward social obligations and favors. For the past 3 years, Sarah had borne the brunt of their household expenses. She honestly couldn't figure out where he would get the money to buy Clara a job. Sarah, I remember we still have some savings at home. How about, having been given a second chance at life? Sarah thought she had already seen through James's despicable shamelessness. She never expected him to lower the bar once again. James, that money is saved for the baby. Even though she had already decided to abort the child, James didn't know that. Yet for Clara's sake, he was actually willing to go this far. Not wanting to speak with him any further, Sarah stood up and moved to a different seat. James wanted to follow her, but Clara called out from behind, stopping him in his tracks. James, it's my turn. James had no choice but to drop it. Watching Sarah's retreating back, he felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest. Throughout Clara's entire prenatal checkup, James was completely absent-minded, his head full of Sarah's cold demeanor from just moments ago. Why was the look in her eyes so indifferent when she looked at me now? Thinking this, James became increasingly uneasy, frequently scanning the lobby for Sarah's figure. Clara took all this in, her smile turning sorrowful. James, you should go accompany Sarah. No matter what, you are her husband. Even though she's being cold to you, I can tell she still has you in her heart. She's just angry that you're taking care of me. As she spoke, her tears began to fall again. Hearing Clara's words, James became certain that Sarah was just throwing a little temper tantrum. How could she not care? She even brought the divorce petition he had written. She might have even followed them to the hospital today. Sigh, why couldn't Sarah just understand him? Forget it. Once he got Clara settled, he would sit Sarah down and give her a proper ideological lecture. The doctor quickly arranged the induced abortion for Sarah. The surgery was so fast that she didn't even have time to think too much. When the anesthesia was injected into her veins, she took one last look at the surgical lights above her, then closed her eyes. By the time she woke up, it was all over. Sarah stayed in the hospital for 5 days. During those 5 days, she carefully recalled the events of her previous life. To confirm what was in her mind, she specifically asked the nurse taking care of her to buy a newspaper. Sure enough, the papers were heavily reporting news about the coastal economic zones. Between the lines, everything was exciting and inspiring, attracting investment, opportunities popping up everywhere, and the massive wave of people heading south for work. Sarah stared at that article for a long time. In her previous life, she had served her in-laws in his hometown for 10 years. By the time she finally stepped back out into society, the world had completely changed. Those who had gone south back then had either opened factories or started businesses. At the very least, they had saved up a tidy sum of money. Only she had been left with nothing. Now, she had the money Nancy gave her for the job and the house, along with her previous savings. These funds were enough for her to head down south to the boomtowns and try her luck. On the day she was discharged from the hospital, the sunlight was just right. Walking to the entrance of the inpatient department, before she even had time to step down the stairs, Sarah saw James picking Clara up in his arms in the open space in front of the prenatal clinic building opposite them. Clara had both hands wrapped around his neck, her face buried in the crook of his shoulder, looking like a helpless little bird relying on him. James held her, his step steady as he walked outward. Sarah stopped in her tracks, standing on the steps and quietly watching the scene. The sunlight was bright, casting a golden halo over the two of them. If one didn't know the inside story, anyone seeing them would think they were a deeply in love married couple. James took a few steps, perhaps catching something in his peripheral vision, and abruptly turned his head. The moment he saw Sarah, his whole body jolted, as if he had been electrocuted. Subconsciously, he moved to put Clara down, but stopped halfway. His movements froze in midair, making him look rather comical. Clara saw Sarah too. Her expression changed slightly, but she didn't let go. Instead, she wrapped her arms around James's neck even tighter. "Sarah," James said, a thin layer of sweat on his forehead and his breathing slightly unsteady. "Why are you at the hospital again today?" Sarah didn't say a word. He probably thought her silence meant she was waiting for an explanation, so he quickly continued. "Clara accidentally took a fall yesterday, so I accompanied her here for a checkup. The doctor said her body is weak, and she can't exert herself, which is why I'm carrying her out. Don't overthink it. It's just normal help." He spoke urgently, his eyes filled with a panic Sarah had never seen in him before. In the past, he would never explain anything to her. Looking at him, she suddenly found it highly amusing. "James," Sarah spoke, her voice as calm as if she were talking about something that had nothing to do with her. "We are already divorced. You don't need to tell me who you are with." His face instantly drained of color. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. Gripping her canvas bag, Sarah walked right past him. James keenly sensed that he had overlooked something crucial. He wanted to call out and stop her, but Clara began to groan softly at that very moment. "James, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable." James's gaze immediately fell back onto Clara. "You really need to be more careful from now on. You're responsible for 2 lives now." After her body had recovered, Sarah began to handle the last few matters before her departure. The first was buying a train ticket. She bought a hard-seat ticket from there to Yangcheng, a journey that would take 2 days and 1 night. The ticket wasn't expensive, just over $30, but she heard the trains were so crowded that even the aisles were packed with people. The second matter was handing over the house and the job to Nancy. Both the house and the job had been assigned to her by the organization, so the paperwork went through faster than she had imagined. Sarah placed the divorce petition and the abortion consent form into an envelope, then handed it to Nancy. "If James comes back to cause trouble for me later, give this letter to him." Nancy squeezed the envelope and nodded. On the night before her departure, Sarah sat in the empty house, staring blankly into space. After a long while, she finally took out some paper and a pen to start writing a letter. She deliberated over this letter for a long time, turning over every single word in her mind repeatedly. The letter detailed 3 things. First, James had fabricated a life-saving debt of gratitude and brought Clara to the military base for settlement under the guise of her being the widow of a martyr, which constituted deceiving the organization. Second, during the existence of his marriage, James maintained an improper relationship with Clara, severely violating military moral discipline. Third, James, in order to curry favor with Clara, attempted to forcefully give away his wife's job and welfare housing, an act of a highly egregious nature. Sarah read the letter 3 times to confirm that every single word was entirely factual, then sealed it in another envelope. The next day, after delivering the letter to the political department's office, she stepped onto the train heading south to the boomtowns. By the time James finally thought of her again, a whole month had passed. James hadn't had a good time during this past month. Ever since Clara took that fall, she had become overly sentimental, frequently gazing at him with teary eyes. Every time they met, she would shed a few tears and say things like, "James, am I causing you too much trouble?" Or, "If it weren't for you, I really don't know what I would do." At first, James would patiently comfort her, but gradually, he began to feel annoyed. He was desperately trying to arrange a job and a place to live for her. Just as he was completely overwhelmed and running himself ragged, Director Davis from the political department suddenly called him in. "James, someone reported you for disciplinary and moral issues," Director Davis said, pushing a letter in front of him. "Take a look for yourself." James picked it up, and the color instantly drained from his face. The letter stated everything with absolute clarity: fabricating a life-saving debt, having an ambiguous relationship with Clara, and attempting to misappropriate his wife's assets. Every single claim included times and locations. It even detailed the incident where he publicly told the service center staff that Clara would be taking over Sarah's shift. "The organization will investigate this," Director Davis said, "but effective today, you are suspended from your duties." James wanted to explain, but found he had absolutely nothing to say. He walked out of the political department in a daze. A sudden thought struck him. If Sarah found out he was suspended, would she suspect that there was something going on between him and Clara? Just the mere thought of it made him panic immensely. He had to explain things clearly. James practically ran all the way back to the family housing quarters. Along the way, his mind was completely filled with Sarah's pale face. He needed to tell her that there was absolutely nothing between him and Clara, and that the lie was just a moment of foolishness on his part. Panting heavily, he sprinted home and rushed up the stairs, only to discover that the person sitting in the house wasn't Sarah. A woman in her 40s was in the living room prepping vegetables. Seeing him barge in, she jumped in fright. "Who are you?" she asked. James froze and carefully looked around. "This is my house," he said, his voice tightening. "Where is Sarah?" The woman looked him up and down, turned around, pulled an envelope out of a cabinet, and slammed it onto the table. "She sold this house to me. Here," she said, "if anyone came looking for her, I should give them this letter." Looking at the envelope on the table, a wave of bad premonitions surged in James's heart. Inside the envelope were 2 documents: the divorce petition he had drawn up and a consent form for an induced abortion. Aside from that, there wasn't a single word. James's vision went dark, and the papers fluttered from his hands onto the floor. Impossible, he muttered to himself, his voice as dry as sandpaper grinding against his throat. There's no way she would abort our child. He abruptly snapped his head up, his eyes entirely bloodshot. Where did she go? Tell me, where did she go? Startled, the woman took a step back and yelled, Are you crazy? You don't even know where the woman carrying your child is, and you come barging into someone else's house acting like a lunatic. Get out! Get out of my house! The woman was none other than Nancy's daughter-in-law. She had long since heard all about James's true character from her mother-in-law, and yet he dared to throw a fit in her house. She forcefully shoved James out the door and slammed it shut with a loud thud. Through the thick wooden door, she cursed, You actually have the nerve to come looking for Sarah. Where were you when she went to the hospital all alone to get an abortion? The woman spat. You were busy holding another woman for her prenatal checkups. What are you pretending to be so heartbroken for now? James stumbled backward from the shove, only managing to steady himself by leaning heavily against the wall. He suddenly remembered bumping into Sarah at the hospital twice, yet he had never once stopped to consider what she was actually there to do. The sunlight outside was bright and beautiful, but James abruptly squatted down, buried his face in his knees, and wept silently. After that day, James became a shell of a man. He refused to believe Sarah had really left. He went to find Nancy, but she didn't even bat an eyelid when she saw him. No matter how much he begged, Nancy only had one thing to say. James, you forced her out, and now you come to me demanding her back? Do you have no shame? He also went looking for a few of Sarah's formerly close colleagues, but all he got were cold shoulders and doors slammed in his face. Not a single person was willing to tell him Sarah's whereabouts. During that time, he asked around everywhere like a madman, train stations, bus stations. He even went to the police station to ask. But it was as if Sarah had evaporated from the face of the earth, leaving not a single trace behind. Just as he was desperately searching for her everywhere, Clara came knocking. Sporting her heavy 7 or 8 month pregnant belly, she stood at the door of his dorm, her eyes red. James, I heard you were suspended, and it's all because of me. I've thought it through. I'll go to the organization and explain everything. I'll tell them I was the one who asked you to make up the lie about the life-saving debt. James stared at her belly, an unbearable bitterness welling up in his heart. If it hadn't been for Clara, he would be well on his way to becoming a father by now. Clara, don't come looking for me anymore, he said. Clara's tears spilled over. James, are you blaming me? I know it's my fault. If it weren't for me, Sarah wouldn't have been so cruel. But tell me, how could she be so heartless? That was her child, too. Hearing those words, James snapped his head up, his eyes so bloodshot they looked ready to drip blood. Shut up! Clara violently shuddered from his roar, her tears freezing on her eyelashes, forgetting to fall. What right do you have to talk about her? James's voice trembled. If you hadn't constantly pestered me, how could Sarah have grown so utterly disheartened that she wouldn't even want our 7-month-old baby? He slammed his fist into the doorframe, his knuckles splitting and seeping blood. Then, he slammed the door shut, locking Clara's cries outside. But James's troubles were just beginning. During his suspension and investigation, he was only given a basic living stipend. The money he used to send back home every month was abruptly cut off. Unaware of what had happened, his parents anxiously took a 2-day train ride to rush over. However, when the 2 elders finally arrived at the military base, exhausted and travel-worn, they were met with the news that their son had been suspended, and their daughter-in-law had aborted their unborn grandchild. And the reason for all of this was that their son had gotten tangled up with a pregnant woman carrying another man's child. Overwhelmed by sheer rage and shock, both of his parents suffered a massive spike in blood pressure. They collapsed headfirst to the ground and passed away one after the other. The military leadership held an emergency overnight meeting to reevaluate James's disciplinary action. What was originally going to be a major demerit, demotion, and transfer was upgraded to a dishonorable discharge. A soldier who deceived the organization, had severe moral failings in his personal life, forced away his pregnant wife, and ultimately drove his own parents to their deaths. A man like this does not deserve to wear this uniform, Director Davis stated plainly at the meeting. When James walked out of the office, entirely devoid of his soul, the sunlight was so piercing he couldn't even open his eyes. He had been kicked out. His 10-year military career had vanished into thin air overnight. He just kept walking forward, completely aimless. But not far away, he saw Clara. She was linking arms with a man, the smile on her face, the same delicate, pitiful look she always used to make people feel sorry for her. James's mind buzzed, all the blood rushing to the top of his head. He thought of his father's dead face, his mother's dead face, and that abortion consent form in Sarah's hand. It was all because of her. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't have lied. He wouldn't have forced Sarah away. he wouldn't have been suspended, and his parents wouldn't have traveled thousands of miles only to be angered to death. And here she was, turning right around and hooking up with another man. James rushed over and grabbed Clara's wrist. "My parents are dead, do you know that?" Clara's lips trembled, her eyes darting away. I heard. James, my condolences." "Condolences?" James's voice shook. "If you hadn't pestered me, Sarah wouldn't have left, and my parents wouldn't have died. And now look at you, already finding someone else." The more he spoke, the more agitated he became. Clara, pushed by him, took a step back, tripped over her own feet, and fell hard backward. Ah! She collapsed heavily onto the ground, her face instantly turning deathly pale. A pool of dark red blood seeped out from under her skirt, spreading rapidly. My baby! My baby!" Clara clutched her stomach, curling up in agonizing pain, her voice growing weaker and weaker. The man she was with turned pale with fright, spun around, and ran away. James stood rooted to the spot, watching the blood on the ground flow larger and larger, his mind a complete blank. Bystanders on the street quickly gathered around. "Hurry! Get her to a hospital!" Someone pointed at James and scolded, "What is wrong with you? She's a pregnant woman." James looked down at his own hands. They were trembling slightly. In the end, Clara's baby could not be saved. Not only that, but due to severe hemorrhaging, her uterus had to be removed, meaning she could never have children again. James was sentenced to 2 years in prison for intentional assault. And all of this, Sarah, far away in the southern boomtown, knew absolutely nothing about, nor did she care. 2 years was enough time to change a lot of things. She went from running a small street stall at the local night market to owning 2 prime storefronts in the massive clothing wholesale market, with over 20 workers under her. In the city, everyone called her Boss Sarah. Not only that, but she had also started dating a real estate tycoon named David. One weekend, David invited her out for a meal downtown. When their car stopped at an intersection to wait for a red light, she inadvertently glanced out the window. Squatting by the roadside was a beggar. His military overcoat was shiny with thick grime, his hair was matted into knots, and his face was covered in dirt. In front of him sat a chipped enamel mug containing a few scattered coins. She hadn't paid much attention at first. There were too many beggars like that in the city. But then he suddenly raised his head. That face was so emaciated it had lost its shape, with high cheekbones and deeply sunken eye sockets. But she recognized those eyes at a single glance. It was James. He recognized her, too. His cloudy eyes widened abruptly, and he staggered to his feet. Sarah withdrew her gaze and calmly said to David, "The light is green." The car slowly started moving. In the rearview mirror, that figure grew smaller and smaller until it completely disappeared into the endless flow of traffic. She did not look back. Some people are destined to remain as the scenery left behind, while her road would always lie straight ahead.
That ending speaks for itself. Financial independence is truly a woman's strongest shield, and karma never misses. Would you have handled it like Sarah did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.